TraceLink's Roddy Martin talks about the Agile supply chain Credo with Accenture's Life Sciences and Supply Chain Operations team. That's right now in this special episode of the Patient-Driven Supply Network podcast.
So Mo, Brad, and Sanjay, as the Accenture Healthcare Life Sciences Supply Chain team, welcome to this thought leadership series where we're talking about the Agile supply chain Credo that we've put together, which is pretty exciting because it's really not a technology or a vendor-focused initiative. It was really to blueprint where we think supply chains need to go in the future, especially in healthcare. And what are the core sort of North Star guiding principles that we think the industry is going to need to adopt? I mean, it's been very evident in the pandemic scenario that supply chains, I wouldn't say are broken, but they certainly have gaps. And we could do a lot better at building our healthcare supply chain. So without further ado, Mo, you introduce yourself, and then if you could just tee up the rest of the team and talk about each of you a little bit about your experience in supply chain, and maybe a parting thought on what you see in the Credo and what you think appeals to you. Over to you, Mo.
Yeah, Roddy, thanks. So my name is Mo Hajibashi. I lead our planning and fulfillment practice within our supply chain and operations organization for strategy and consulting for Accenture globally. And, we've got a team of very senior folks here. I'll let, Brad and Sanjay introduce themselves. But, when your point around, supply chains and where they're headed, and frankly, what we're dealing with being agile in the supply chain, or frankly, agile in the value chain, to me it's not a new concept, right? That really is out there. We've been talking about agility. We've been talking about ecosystem of value chains that need to be connected in order to solve for optimizing, the entire value chain for specific industries. And what I do see, though, is that the importance of this, in particular in today's times, if you look at the COVID environment that we're in, has been accentuated, right? Is really the ability to be able to respond to different demands that exist in the marketplace. And now the visibility that we have to that specific demand down to almost, in certain industries, and I don't see the healthcare industry being any different, really getting visibility down to the individual end consumer, right? In this case, and getting more customized around the products and services that they need in the marketplace, and essentially building your value chain to address those needs. That's really where I think a combination of things, if you look at the capabilities that exist in the marketplace today with cloud computing and access to information everywhere, to the devices that now consumers are able to actually share information, how they're sharing information that we can actually tap into as parts of the value chain, and essentially now taking that information and feeding it through the entire value chain itself so that we're customizing the services and capabilities that have historically been built for, let's say, volume-based distribution, to large masses of customers in the marketplace by certain demographics or regions or whatever, now can actually be customized down to the end consumer. And that is the fundamental shift that I think, the Credo touches on for sure. And frankly, now every supply chain is trying to solve for is being able to have the capabilities to be able to respond to now that changing demand at that level versus the large volumes we've been solving for historically.
So Mo, that's really great. And in fact, let me draw out a point you made, which I think is a pertinent one. And that is, when I said supply chain, you said value chain. And I think that is the fundamental point. And that value chain, in this case, starts at the patient. And that's really the core epicenter of this whole Credo is, how do we re-engineer healthcare end-to-end supply chains with the patient at the center? So that's great. So Brad?
Yeah, hey, thanks, Roddy. It's Brad Pulowski. I lead our supply chain and ops practice in the Northeast. That's part of our strategy and consulting group. Have focused primarily on life sciences and consumer goods companies all my career on end-to-end supply chain transformations. So most recently, very much on the digital supply chain, intelligent supply chain front, adapting things like analytics, automation, how to really make that a reality. And I guess what I would comment on here is, we sit at this point in time that is what I'll call kind of the precipice of realization. At this point, most companies have some sort of digital agenda and have done some sort of, proof of concepts. The challenge is realizing that and truly embracing digital, and what does that mean? And what I like about the Agile Credo is it helps to push towards making these things a reality. I mean, you could argue, there's the old phrase of analysis paralysis. We're quite frankly in a POC paralysis right now. I mean, who hasn't done an analytics prototype? Who hasn't done an automation prototype or a blockchain prototype? How do you scale that up, and how do you make that meaningful and make a meaningful change to the end-to-end value chain that Mo was talking about? Because it's one thing to say, I'm going to take my supply chain planning processes and I'm going to add some automation so that some of the data gets scrubbed and I have cleaner historical data. But if you want to truly reshape that entire organization so that 50% of the tasks that are being can be automated, and you rethink that entire org and what people are doing, that's a big step. And most companies haven't been able to really become digital on that front. And I think if you look at some of the tenets of the Agile Credo, it'll help companies push themselves to truly become digital in that sense. And so I think it's this important tipping point we're at. And the way companies, from my experience, need to think about this is what's within their control and what's outside of their control. Because what's within their control are things that, talking about truly scaling up some of those digital capabilities. They can stand up an analytics organization and break down the walls that exist between business and IT. They can do that themselves. Some of the bigger industry factors, if we talk about, the healthcare value chain, that may have to come from external factors. The patient-centric supply chain, as we've talked about it for years, is an idea that everybody wants to focus on. We know there's going to have to be some regulatory changes to truly realize that vision. So companies shouldn't sit around and wait for those to happen, for us to be able to truly create personalized medicine and get some of that information, throughout the entire value chain instead of it being siloed. But they can still make the changes within their organization so that they're ready for that and operate more efficiently in the meantime. So I think there's, what that can be controlled within the four walls, creating more digital, and then some external factors that should change as well.
Well said. And I think, you and I have both been on projects together in big life sciences companies where when we've introduced the idea of, build from the patient back, and it's, well, hang on, let's not confuse the business. That's a lot for them to swallow. Nobody says that we're going to suddenly be patient-centric tomorrow, but let's at least bear the patient in mind as we're designing the supply chain all the way back to suppliers. And I mean, take a leaf out of P&G's book. They designed their whole business from the shelf back to supply. So, what's wrong with that? I mean, Alessandro De Luca, who's on the panel talking about the Credo, was the CIO of Procter & Gamble, and he's now coined the expression, the patient-driven supply chain. I think I know where he got that from, right? Because it was the consumer-driven supply network at Procter & Gamble. So, Brad, great points. Let me hand over to Sanjay. Sanjay, introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your role at Accenture.
Thank you, Roddy. Sanjay Srivastav. I lead our personalized medicine center of excellence, specifically cell and gene therapies. As most of you know, it's the new modalities that are coming in. There's a lot of excitement in the industry around these because they're potentially curative. But with that, actually, it brings a new paradigm on how we think about supply chains. As Mo and Brad both have said earlier, that we've been talking about agile, demand-driven supply chains for a very, very long time. And so have we been talking about patient-centric. So none of that is new, but yet there were challenges for life sciences companies to actually adopt and implement those supply chains. But with cell and gene therapies, without adopting those practices, we cannot execute. Because for the truly one batch for one patient supply chain that are truly demand-driven cannot operate in the legacy environment. So what we do and what we are helping with is companies to adopt these practices. These practices are evolving, and we are helping to drive that effort to get these implemented as quickly as we can. The standards are new. The standards are coming in. Now, besides being patient-centric and demand-driven, what is important for cell and gene therapy, and not just for cell and gene therapy, but also for other modalities, is collaboration. Because when we talk about agile and demand-driven supply chains, pharma alone cannot make it happen. It is about network collaboration. It is about providing end-to-end visibility to know where the patient is, where the product is, and where the cell and tissues might be in case of cell and gene therapies. That's one aspect that we have to incorporate in the patient centricity, is the ecosystem participation and each ecosystem partner providing the value to the system. The second piece that also is part of the Credo is the human insights over a very strictly automated operations. We all talk about digital automation and making it fully automated supply chains where human interaction may be limited. But at least in cell and gene therapies and many other modalities, rare diseases, where patients are truly very, very sick and are in need for these very innovative medicines, human insight becomes imperative. And we have to often provide that intervention to the supply chains to manage the patient journeys. And so while digital agenda is important, we need to have human insights on top of that digital agenda to make this work.
So I think that's a fantastic point. And I want to go back to both Mo and Brad. And I think, the days of inside out driven, ERP forecast driven supply chains, we're done, right? And I know that Accenture has a huge strategy around network platforms and being able to connect that collaboration network that you refer to, around a digital platform as the augmentation of the end-to-end supply chain. So Mo, maybe let's start with you a little bit about those seismic technology shifts that you see as we go from inside out transaction driven to outside in, as how Lee calls it, really smart, hyper agile platforms that can support agile operations.
Yeah. No, I think, this is, to me, one of the fundamental disruptors that we've seen, in the last, 5 to 10 years that is emerging. So if you think about technologically, in-memory data processing, right, which is allowing us to process massive amounts of information in literally seconds, which used to take hours of batch processing time. And if you think about what that means from a data ingestion perspective and the ability to manipulate data in fundamentally different ways to solve across so many complex dimensions of what we're solving for in a business and a value chain, that is one fundamental disruptor. Now, that simple point alone, how that drives in combination with cloud computing infrastructures, that no longer do you have to have a system in your four walls, to be able to run your entire value chain. You now have the ability to tap into cloud-based infrastructure with this in-memory data processing to be able to get access to all the data points sitting across that entire value chain. Now, the question for companies is how am I taking advantage of all that data to solve for what I'm trying to take to market? And the reality is, we were talking earlier about, whether companies are making the decisions, the investments they're needing to make on digital platforms. The reality is, it's going to be disrupted either by the companies themselves or new entrants that are. Look at what happened to the retail industry with Amazon. Amazon disrupted that entire industry simply by taking consumer information, standing up a brand new, homegrown, essentially value chain to be able to solve those needs to drive a differentiated service. We're not talking about anything much different. And now the types of insights that you can capture down to the patient level, as you're saying here, and then translate that back down to the products that are specific for that specific patient, and then enabling them from a supply chain perspective to manufacture in a different way and fulfill to their specific needs that drive, a very customer-centric or patient-centric approach. That's what's happening. And now the technology is there to essentially do that.
And I think that's really exciting. And I mean, to Sanjay's point, I think, cell and gene therapy or personalized medicine simply can't scale. If you're a massive company and you've invested, no matter how good a job you did of putting in your favorite ERP system, it's just not going to be agile enough to be able to support these, batches of one or community of 10 patients spread across the world and, having to get small doses of therapies to them. So,
Yeah.
Brad,
Yeah, go ahead.
what would you say?
Well, I guess just to pick up one point Mo mentioned, I mean, Amazon, everyone likes to throw that around, but if you don't think Amazon's, coming after health, you're not paying attention, right? They're already here. And so look at what COVID has brought upon us with the telemedicine spike, right? And rightfully so, right? The whole, experience with doctors, that it's just one of those that needed to be disrupted, weeks and months to get an appointment. And then, you'd have to spend 4 or 6 hours just to see a doctor. Now you can just log on and talk to somebody and get a prescription in a matter of 15 minutes. Well, guess what's coming right behind that is the Amazon shipment to bring it to your door, right? So if we think that the rules and the disruption aren't in this industry already and going to accelerate, I think you're going to be in trouble. So you've got to be willing to challenge your norms because the disruption is here and it is going to accelerate. I think if you come back to some of the technologies, one of the kind of eye-opening aspects of when blockchain was first being considered, and a lot of it was being considered around the track and trace side, et cetera. One of the reasons I think companies struggle with blockchain is it was fundamentally opposed to the way companies were set up in terms of data management. The whole theory, simplifying it way down, of blockchain was everyone has access to all the same information. And if you think about how companies are set up, it is the complete opposite. It is, I hold on to my data and I'm going to give it to you on my terms. And then the next, partner is going to do the same and pass it along. So blockchain, kind of came up against this brick wall, which was kind of these corporate barricades that prevented the sharing that everyone acknowledges would make the end-to-end process much more streamlined, but for reasons that weren't necessarily for optimization or even safety, just a matter of, hey, it's my data, I want to hold on to it. That's what slowed that down. So it kind of brought to bear what some of the realities are. And so what I would challenge companies to do is think about those barricades you have, even within your 4 walls. If you talk about, change control, when you get a, formula change to a product, how many steps does it take to get that through and out to a product on the market, right? And are those really necessary? So before you even want to break down the walls that would allow you externally to get to a true patient-centric supply chain, you got to break down the walls internally, because I guarantee you, between R&D, between manufacturing, between supply chain, between market, there are so many barriers to just kind of proliferate a change control through that you got work to do now so that you're ready to truly become more end-to-end and patient-centric.
Fantastic point. And if you think PillPack was a full philanthropic exercise by Amazon, think again, right? I mean,
Exactly.
I've had some insight into where that's going, and it's kind of really interesting. I mean, the article I wrote on Amazonification of supply chains is alive and well. And, I spend probably do a third of my grocery shopping on Amazon, and I know when I place the order and I know when it's going to be delivered at my door. So great points. So Sanjay, your point.
Yeah, I think I'll echo what Brad was saying in terms of breaking down the silos and also the holding onto the data. We're seeing that in cell and gene therapy as well. As all the companies are building their supply chains in silos and creating technologies, the portals that are creating a fragmentation in the marketplace, that is creating a huge burden on the hospital systems when they have to cater to different supply chains for single therapy, because all of these centers are multi-therapies. The second aspect, internally, as Brad pointed out, the silo piece is very important in cell and gene. 2 considerations here. One is that when you talk about manufacturing in supply chains, traditionally the metrics and the process controls were all about product quality. And how do we manage that? Here in cell and gene, when we are administering live drugs into the patients, every variable in manufacturing impacts outcomes to a different degree. And we need to do sensitivity analysis to understand which variable impact the most on the outcomes. Therefore, break down the silos from a commercial and medical affairs to access the clinical outcomes data and bring it back to the manufacturing to do the meta-analysis and analytics is going to improve manufacturing operations as well as identify the patients that's going to benefit the most from the therapies to be able to do patient stratification, as an example.
And I think those are very good points. And in fact, that's why I think in the, I hate to say the old days, but in the past, we got consultants to implement an ERP and we said, get on with it, call us when you're finished. Well, that's just not the case anymore. And I think the point you make is you have to go and do this network analysis with specialized management consultants and teams like Accenture who really know how to think about the value stream, right? Because this is not deploying technology. This is about a fundamentally new operating model for the business. It's not just, we're going to engineer our business to work like our ERP system says that we're going to operate. So, really good point. And I think we spent a lot of time with a lot of the input on the Credo focusing on, augmenting people with systems, not using systems to drive people like robots, because that is really not the idea. So in closing, because, we're at the end of our time, one recommendation point from each of you on, if you were sitting in front of a senior C-level executive at a life sciences company and they said, hey, what do we make of this Credo? What would your piece of advice be to them? Because obviously it doesn't say go and do this tomorrow. It says you got to change your mental model. So Mo, let's start with you.
Yeah, and I think, Roddy, what's so nice about the Credo, and it's what we're out telling our clients is, there are investments that everybody's making. There's no question of that. Brad hit on it, but there typically seem to be very tactical investments to prove out capabilities in very specific points. And in many cases, we're not necessarily tied in to an overarching vision or strategy, meaning what is the North Star that you're actually, migrating towards? And then all your investments and initiatives need to be essentially stepping stones or building blocks to achieve that vision. It seems a little bit loose. So my coaching would be establish a clear vision. That vision may change based off of the learnings of the investments you make over time. You will not transform in a month or 2 months or even a year. This is massive transformation for most companies. But the point is set up a North Star, a clear North Star, and then lay out your roadmap. And then that is going to be a flexible roadmap to achieve that goal.
Great. And I mean, that's not a 6-month project, right? This is something that you need to take on as a transformation initiative top down in the organization. So great points, Mo. Brad?
Yeah, my advice to C-suite would be disrupt yourself before you're disrupted. You don't want to be on the receiving end of the disruption. You can look at various signals, whether we talk about the end-to-end value stream and patient centricity, talk about competitors like Amazon, we can talk about, CVS and Aetna. The signals are all there. And there's a lot you can control immediately. And you want to do that disruption to yourself. And I think one example of that, just if you look at the heart of what we're talking about in true patient centricity and some of the personalized medicine that Sanjay talked about, it comes down to cycle time of manufacturing. And that's something you can control today. You could put in a bunch of initiatives to reduce that, to have better visibility, to streamline your operations. And again, it's better to do that to yourself now than to have the market forces tell you need to do it immediately because you're getting disrupted. So disrupt yourself would be what my advice would be.
Great point. And I think when you're operating as a network, to Mo's point, you can actually all collaborate and share data. When you're working as one long stream of integrated systems, passing data from one partner and one mode of the supply chain to the next, you're never going to get there. So I think your point of disrupt yourself is, how do we operate as a network? Let's figure that out. Let's put that as the elephant in the room, and let's figure out how to get that done. So great point. Thanks, Brad. Sanjay.
Yeah, I think both Mo and Brad have said a lot of good points. And what I would say is to add to those two is simply one thing: embrace the change, because we are in a new paradigm. And what we are seeing and what is important for these organizations, and it has to come from C-suite, is the change, the change management aspect to it. Embrace what patient centricity and network collaboration is about supply chain, and push it down to the organization so that we can actually operate in that manner and go beyond being a drug supplier to being truly a partner to the patient, to our customers, and to our partners.
Fantastic. So, With that, thank you very, very much, Mo, Brad, and Sanjay. This has done absolute justice to having you break the ice on a partner of TraceLinks talking about the Agile Credo. I think every point has been insightful. It's been content rich. And I really appreciate the time that you've given up to do this with us. So thank you very much. And let's call it a day. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Roddy.
Bye.
Thank you, Roddy,
Roddy.
for
Sure.
setting this up.
Bye-bye.
Bye.